Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy. Today we've got the Sigma 24 to 70 F2.8 DG DN, in this case for Sony E mount, but also available for Leica L mount. At the time of this recording, not available for any of the other full frame mounts because unfortunately Canon and Nikon just don't seem to want to let everyone play in their yard. But is this lens good for astrophotography? Should you use a zoom lens for astrophotography? Well, we can find out. This lens has been out for a little while. It is part of the ART series. Got a pedal-shaped hood. It's the type where they've got that little button in it, and it's got a nice rubberized mount to it. Here we can see we've got our autofocus, manual focus switch. We've got our customizable button. We've got a lock here, and that will lock our zoom ring so that we don't inadvertently let it all hang out, but with a little bit of pressure, and it does only lock at 24 mil, we can just overcome it and zoom to the full 70 there. The focus ring is too loose. It's just too loose. Not mechanically coupled, it's electronic and it's too loose. As far as everything else, this lens kind of predates Sigma putting aperture rings on all their lenses. It does have an 82 millimeter filter thread, so it's got a big chunky front element. Pretty standard as far as 24 to 70 lenses go, at least f2.8 lenses. And overall, this is just a really good lens for what it does. That said, is it a good astrophotography lens? Well, is it going to be as good as a f2 prime or even an f2.8 prime? Probably not. But if it's what you have, is it worth actually taking out? Well, we're going to find out in a moment. Howdy folks, welcome to Lightroom. Today we're going to look at some samples that I have had on the back burner for 2 years. Ugh. Namely, samples from the now superseded Sigma 24 to 70 f2.8 DG DN version 1, released in 2019. As of the time that I took these samples, only a 3-year-old lens, but now a lens that has been replaced. We're going to do it anyway because I put the work into making this, so why not? So these are some samples that I took one night in August 2022. These samples were taken with the Sony a7R Mark IV because the a7R Mark V that I use now did not exist. These samples are actually 2-minute exposures, tracked with the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II portable star tracker. Fervent Astronomy is Fornax's North American distributor, so if you're interested in learning more about this bomb-proof tracker, by all means, go to ferventastronomy.com and you can do so. Here everything is f2.8, and I just went through the various focal lengths along the zoom range here. We're here at ISO 320. This is the a7R Mark IV's second base ISO. This is a dual gain sensor, which means that it has 2 analog amplification stages, or another way to think of it is 2 real ISO values, one at 100, one at 320. And what does this mean? Well, it means for every other ISO that in the camera, and you can set it at all kinds of different ISO values, the camera is interpolating them digitally. It's just applying digital amplification, the same thing that we do when we come up here and we click the exposure button a couple of times. And as such, I don't gain anything shooting the images at a higher ISO. In fact, I might actually lose something. So if I shoot these same sets of images that I shot at 320, if I shoot them at 3200, if I bring them both in the Lightroom, I can make the 320 version look identical to the 3200 version. I can give you the same noise. I can give you the same ability to boost the shadows, detail, everything the same. But on the lower ISO here, shot at the base ISO on that part of the range, what I can do is retain any blown out highlights that are baked into the file at ISO 3200. Stars, galaxy cores, bright star forming regions in emission nebulae, for instance. These are all places where you might lose highlight information. So if your camera is ISO invariant, it might benefit you, depending on your personal preferences and the subject matter, to shoot at the base ISO. If you want to learn more about that, link in the description will bring you back to ferventastronomy.com, where there's a lot of resources, including an article written exactly about this ISO invariance, and I really encourage you to read it. The other thing that you will find at the end of that link is another link to these samples where you'll be able to download them, pixel peep them in their full glory, and decide if this lens is something that's worth taking out for astrophotography. I'm not here to tell you yes or no. I'm just here to give you the information that you need to make that decision for yourself. Mind you, you can now find this lens on the used market for a little bit less than you probably could before. So this might be something that is in consideration. And if that's the case, well, we'll see if this helps push you one way or the other. I do hope that I get a chance to test the newer version. At the moment, I don't have one. Maybe that'll come out one day. All that being said, these are still my copyrighted works, so please respect that. Please don't redistribute them online or elsewhere. Please don't misrepresent them as your own. Please don't use them as the basis for your own review. I put sweat equity into getting these, and I would like it very much if you would use them in good faith for the purposes that I'm providing them, which is just personally assessing this lens's performance. All that out of the way, let's just jump in and see what this lens can do. Here we are at 24 millimeters. F2.8, even tracked at 2 minutes, this is not the brightest image. We're gonna bump the exposure. Let's go 2 stops here. All right, so right away we're gonna notice a definite green tinge to the image. This has nothing to do with the lens itself. There was a lot of aurora and sky glow going on the week that I took these samples. In fact, there was some pretty powerful aurora a day or two later. So that is what's going on here. You can kind of ignore the green. First thing we can notice, there is a little bit of vignetting. Can help to look in the navigator here. You can see corners are a little darker. Very much expected. That's by and large how most, if not all, lenses will perform. And here we're no different. As far as contrast goes, well, at f2.8, you usually wouldn't worry about low contrast from shooting wide open. Typically, here there might be, I can't say for sure one way or the other. And since all the samples are at f2.8, well, I would just recommend taking it as it is. Let's pop into the center here and see what we can see. So first thing, star right here. Don't see much in the way of chromatic aberration in the center here, which is good. We are getting pretty decent contrast on the star. I don't see it bloating out too much. Maybe just like a smidgy. So I think the spherical aberrations are pretty okay in this respect. Here you can see the brighter stars show up bigger, and they tend to be rounder, especially when it comes to the Milky Way, especially with the A7R Mark IV. You get a little bit more of Sony's spatial filtering algorithms mucking things up, which is to say, if you've ever heard the term star eater, this is this camera's unique manifestation of that. And it kind of just takes stars that aren't quite bright enough and it makes weird shapes out of them. Not really visible from normal viewing distances, but here at 400%, we can definitely see that that's not round. All kinds of interesting squiggles here. It is how this camera works. The A7R Mark V actually is a bit better than this. They do tend to stay more, if not round, at least dot shaped. So that's not too bad. But overall, not seeing a ton of actual aberrations here in the middle. So let's check the corners. All right, so this is definitely what one would expect, especially from a zoom like this. You see all these little, almost looks like a flock of space geese flying south, which is what they're doing right now up here in Alberta, Canada, abandoning us as the winter comes. Anyway, my trepidations with winter's coming onslaught aside, what does this tell us? Well, a couple of things. First of all, there's a little chromatic aberration here on the brighter stars, but since it wasn't in the center of the frame, it's out here in the edges and it's not that bad. I would say don't worry about that too much. These shapes, however, are, again, what I expected, but they do affect your images. This is a manifestation of astigmatism. Some of you might have been thinking to yourself just now, oh, the coma in this lens is really bad. And this is not coma, friends. This is 2 types of astigmatism. So there is tangential astigmatism, which radiates from the center to the edges of the frame, and it follows these lines the whole way. So anytime there is a star, if there is tangential astigmatism, you'll get a lengthening along that particular radius. So, which is to say, every star in an area that's affected by that tangential astigmatism will stretch out. Basically, the lens cannot lens that pinpoint of light and focus it in a pinpoint, and it's getting spread out. The wings here are a different type of astigmatism called sagittal astigmatism, and it occurs at a right angle to the tangential astigmatism. So wherever you go in the frame, when there is that tangential astigmatism, depending on your lens's sagittal astigmatism level, you will find it at a right angle. Sometimes it might appear to curve or bend in one way or the other, but it will never be along that same radius. It will always be lateral to that tangential astigmatism. And the sagittal, because of that, will tend to appear like it rings the frame. It will never point towards the dead center, never point towards the edge, at least along that center radius. So here, as you move around, you can see different shapes, basically, depending on how bright the stars are. This one's got kind of like split tail with some chromatic aberration wing flames. This one's a little tighter, it almost looks like a butterfly. And wherever we go, here you see now they're still here, but pointed in a different direction, again towards the center of the frame, because we're now in the top right-hand corner, bottom right-hand corner, bottom left. They'll always be oriented towards the center, or depending on how you want to look at it, away from the center of the frame. So that is, again, completely expected. And where it becomes an issue for me personally is when it makes the stars along the edges and corners look noticeably different than the stars at the center of the frame. Here you can see we have maybe a little bit of change in the shape happening, but overall these stars are pretty consistently blobby shapes, right? So here and here look a fair bit different. You can tell that you compare this area to this area, that things are getting bigger as they go along here towards the corner. It can be used in an artistic way, but it can also be distracting, at least for me personally, when they get big enough that it appears that they're different. And it kind of, to me, looks like you're looking through the bottom of a soda bottle or something. So it's not the worst I've seen. You can't really tell that the shapes are too much different from a normal viewing distance like this. Obviously, when you zoom in, it's really, really in your face, but when you're at a normal viewing distance, not as much, at least with the shapes, but it does give that effect that it's bigger. Can't get around it. It is just how it is. Now, if we come in here and we look around a little bit, one thing I'm not seeing is coma. And coma, or chromatic aberration, is a different type of aberration. What happens is the stars will turn into deltas and they'll get a fuzzy tail. And that fuzzy tail is thought to resemble the tail of a comet. Comet, coma, chromatic aberration, that's where the name comes from. And in this case, we're not really seeing that. Like the brighter stars really aren't fuzzing out. And as we get towards the edge of the frame, we're getting that astigmatism, but we're not getting these comet tails forming. So this lens, coma, not really. One thing that you can get as well is field curvature. That's when stars at different parts of the frame are focused at different focal planes. So you might get the center in focus, but when you get out to the edges, they might defocus, or vice versa. You might focus in the corner and the stars in the center are out of focus. And here, I don't really see a ton of that happening. The astigmatism by far is what's causing a change in the size of the stars here. But overall, if we look at stars here, compare that to the mouse cursor, and we pop over here, compare some stars to the size of the mouse cursor, they're about the same. So I don't think field curvature is really an issue here. Just a lot of astigmatism, which for a zoom lens is kind of the price you have to pay to have all those focal lengths in one product. So that being said, let's zoom that lens in. So this is 24 millimeters, 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters, and change here in this case, 70 millimeters. Now, as you zoom in, you are obviously changing your field of view, and that can change what kind of aberrations we're going to get. So we're just going to go through and look at the centers and corners in all of these as well. One interesting thing I will mention about this lens is that it's parfocal. Essentially, when you are in focus at 24 millimeters, you can zoom all the way into 70 millimeters and then zoom all the way back out to 24 millimeters and have it remain in acceptable focus the entire time. That's pretty convenient for those of us like myself who are pretty forgetful and might focus, then change the zoom value and then forget to refocus. Now, it's not something that's make or break one way or the other, but I thought I would mention it. All right, let's look at the corners and see how things change as we zoom in. So this is 24 millimeters, lots of astigmatism, 35 millimeters, some astigmatism, but notice that it's largely gone away, but has been replaced by stars that are significantly different size. So here, if you take a look at the center stars again, compare them to the mouse cursor, jump back out to the edge, compare them again. Here what we're seeing is that the field curvature at 35 is a little more than it was at 24. This is 50 millimeters, and here this is very similar to 35. We only have a couple of these stars that are really experiencing the astigmatism, and again we do have some defocusing, some field curvature happening there in the corner. Let's go up to 70 millimeters, and here I can already tell that the field curvature is reduced a little bit. We have a little bit tighter stars, but there is some more of that astigmatism. Probably that defocusing was getting rid of some of that for us, but now that we're a little bit more in focus, we're getting that tangential astigmatism back and some of that sagittal astigmatism, although I would say it's not as bad as it was at 24 millimeters. And overall, it does look a little bit cleaner, although I do still get the sense that the edges are bloating the stars a little bit compared to how small and tight they are at the center of the frame. Still, I would say for a zoom lens, this is pretty much the expectation. You do have to make some compromises to carry 4 lenses in one. Here we can see with the North American Nebula, got a little bit of that magenta coming through, which is nice to see. 2-minute exposure at f2.8, mind you, and this green cast from the sky glow, if that were not there, this might be a little bit more prominent. That's neither here nor there. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's go take a look at the corrections in the develop module. Since we're here at 70 millimeters, let's just see what we have to work with. Zooming into the corners. Again, there wasn't a ton of chromatic aberration, so I'm not expecting that correction to do much, but let's see. Yeah, flipping it on and off. I can see a little bit changing with these stars, the worst offenders, but not a whole heck of a lot. You can come in here and defringe them manually, and that does work, but I don't know that there's much point in doing that because there's not a lot of fringing going on in the center here. Now, if we look at the profile correction, we can see at 70 millimeters, the lens has a bit of pin cushion distortion, which is to say the center of the frame appears like it's pushed away from the viewer a little bit. When we enable the corrections, it does a geometric transformation and brings it back towards the viewer. We just scale down a little bit. We can see how that's done. It's stretching the image a little bit out at the edges, so you are going to lose a little bit of focal length along the edges, but not in the corners by the looks of things here. Let's see, we'll flip it on and off another couple of times. Yeah, you're not losing diagonal field of view. Just a little bit on the edges, but probably I'm going to assume you didn't have a ton of stuff there anyway. One thing that I will say is that the vignetting is more or less cleaned up. Here we've got that part of the Milky Way that's keeping these corners bright, and these corners are naturally darker. But with that vignetting cleared up, the exposure seems to be pretty consistent. And in that case, I don't quite notice any major problems with the star size. So I think that astigmatism, at least at 70 millimeters, isn't a ton to worry about. Let's go back to 50. And at 50, I can see there is a little bit more fringing here, actually. So we can defringe that, and that takes care of the bluish purple. And if we apply that profile correction, again, we can see that at 50, we're experiencing some minor pin cushion that's corrected. At 35, a little bit of that fringing wasn't as bad as it is maybe at 50, but it's not a hard thing to fix one way or the other. And if we enable the profile correction, we can see that here, right in the center of the frame, I think we're almost flat. And when we enable the profile correction, it's bringing this part of the frame out towards the viewer. So for the most part, here it's pretty flat, and there's only really distortion being corrected outside here. So this might indicate that somewhere around 35 millimeters is this particular lens's sweet spot as far as distortion is concerned. We pop back to 24 millimeters. 24 millimeters, we're not really seeing that chromatic aberration and fringing as much. There is like a tiny bit here, but we're so zoomed out by that point that it's hard to really see. And if we do the profile correction, here we're getting a correction of barrel distortion. So as shot, the middle of the frame is pulled out towards the viewer a little bit and the edges are pushed away. So when we do enable that profile correction, it's flattening things out. It's pushing that center away from the viewer and it's pulling the corners out essentially. And if we scale down, we can see that we are losing some of the edges and corners, but not so much in the middle, more in that corner area. So all in all, you're not losing a ton of field of view, but a little bit, and the vignetting correction seems to be pretty cromulent. So that's pretty good. You know, this is now an old, obsoleted lens, but I hope that if there's anyone out there that was wondering if they could justify it to themselves for astrophotography, if this kind of performance is acceptable to you, I hope that's helped you make your decision, or I hope it's helped somebody make a decision one way or the other. At any rate, let's jump out of Lightroom and wrap this up. All right, well, really no surprises, frankly. I think probably one of the nicest things about this lens is the fact that it is pretty parfocal. So if you focus at 24 millimeters and then zoom into 70 for whatever reason, you should still be in focus. And then if you zoom back out to 24, you should still be in focus, which is really nice, especially if you are doing manual focusing and you don't want to spoil that focus on the stars. It is a zoom lens. All lens design is a game of compromises, and to make a zoom, you do have to compromise on things like distortion and aberrations and that type of thing. I am not going to use this lens for astrophotography personally because I have more specialized options, but if I had no choice, would I? Absolutely. I remember back in 2020, I went out one night just randomly camping, hadn't intended to do any astro. I just had, I think, a D850 and Nikon's version 1 of their 24 to 70 2.8. I even forgot a tripod. I guess forgot maybe is embellishing. I didn't think I would need one, which was the first and last time I made that stupid choice, but I got some really nice shots-ish, shots that I enjoyed taking and enjoyed having. So yeah, it's worth taking astrophotography if this is all you got in the bag. And this is what you got. This is way better than what we had even 10 years ago, right? So as long as you're out under the sky, I think that's what's the important thing here. I hope you found this informative. Thanks again for watching, as always, and hopefully we'll catch you in the next one.